So on that piece of paper is the link to download the lab documentation and your student ID. That'll come into play throughout the lab. So we're here to talk about PingOne for Enterprise Partner Managed Accounts, which is a coming feature in PingOne. My name is Kirk Hamilton. I'm with the support group at Ping Identity, and we have Mark Dorey, who's the product manager for PingOne for Enterprise, and John DaSilva, who's a team lead in our professional services group. So for those not familiar with PingOne for Enterprise, SSO for SaaS apps accounts, it allows you to connect your enterprise users, partners, or customers to your SaaS applications that you offer. So there's a variety of considerations here. Your SaaS applications may have limited SAML support or no SAML support at all right now, and your partners have different needs. So some might wish to use their own SSO solution to federate their users. Some want you to manage all the users for you, or for them, sorry. Some require multi-factor authentication, an application portal, or some other PingOne for Enterprise workforce to SaaS functionality. And some don't, they might just have a simple use case. So we'll get right into it. So if you go to the link on the screen here, the usernames that we've pre-configured for you are all in the format student X, and you'll replace X with the number on your sheet. And the password for the account is going to be Boston 2018, as you see there. Obviously not a production grade password, but it's easy for you to type in if you're following along. And I lost my mouse control. Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. So we're going to navigate to admin.pingone.com. So you'll log in with the username provided. So once you log in, you'll have to accept the terms and conditions if you wish to continue, but you'll land on the PingOne dashboard. So the first thing we need to do is create an application. So this is going to create the connection from PingOne to your SaaS application. So we do that by going to Applications and Add New Application. So here we collect some basic information about your application. So you'll give it a name. And a description that other administrators, if they were connecting to this, they would see this description. So usually it's just the kind of promotional description for your application. And then we can specify an icon for our application. So I've included a link to the Identiverse logo that you can use for this icon if you wish, or if you have another icon saved on your laptop, you can use that. And this application is one that's only going to be available to our partners. This is not going to be available in our PingOne's public application catalog, so we'll choose the private option. And the logo we don't have to worry about. That's for use on a legacy version of the PingOne doc, so we'll leave that as is. So here we define how PingOne is going to connect to your application. So if you have SAML support, well, you would choose that option, which is what we're going to do today. If your application doesn't support SAML, we can use a REST API that PingOne makes available. So you would choose that option if it were applicable. So we need to specify metadata information to PingOne to connect to our application. So we can do that by manually entering settings, or if your application's administrator had exported metadata, you could upload that file, or you can choose the use URL option. So that's what we're going to do today. So that URL is in the bottom of the lab manual. So again, it does have a reference number at the bottom of it, or an URL. You'll just change the X to your student number. So we'll choose the use URL option and paste in our URL. And then replace the X with your number. And then just hit tab or just click out of that field to have PingOne retrieve that metadata file. And you'll notice that it has populated the ACS URL and entity ID. Has everybody finished that fire so far? Okay, sure. Just give me a heads up. Okay, so now we've imported the information necessary for PingOne to connect to the application. So the other part of this is that we need to provide the information to the service provider administrator. So we've already done that for the case of this lab, but in the real world, you would download the metadata and give that to the application's administrator. So you have a download link right here. Or if they don't have a facility to import metadata, they could just enter these settings manually. So they're displayed on the screen for you here. So through the metadata import process, the certificate also came with it for verifying the SAML authn requests, and we have a default signing algorithm of RSA SHA-256. If your application required something different, you definitely have the option to change that. So we're going to continue. So this is where we define the attributes that our application requires. So we'll notice that there are two at the bottom here, PingOne IDP ID and PingOne Authenticating Authority. These are special attributes when it comes to PingOne, so we can actually remove these from our configuration. PingOne will still handle them for us. So we'll remove ping1.idpid and ping1.authenticating authority. And we're actually going to add another attribute here that's also a special attribute. It's called SAML subject. So this is the subject that's going to come in from your identity provider in the as the subject value. So PingOne would normally pass this through anyways, but we're going to add it here because we might have a partner that needs us to do some attribute mapping or manipulation to this value as it gets passed through. So we'll specify a SAML subject here. And we can define a description here because, like I mentioned earlier, there's different use cases. So sometimes you're going to be the one that's doing this, and then other times your partner's administrator are going to be doing this if you were to do an invited connection or something like that. So we want to give some guidance as to what they want to map these values to. And it's probably a good idea just to copy that out because we can repeat some of this in the other descriptions. And then when you're done editing it, just hit enter to apply the change. So we go through and we'll just give another friendly description here. So in our case, we want to make sure we're getting the user's primary email address. So we'll notice there's a checkbox here we can apply required. What this means is if a SAML assertion comes to PingOne where this attribute is not included, PingOne will stop the transaction right there and show the user an error that SSO failed because they're missing an attribute. The alternative to doing this would be to just let PingOne pass the user through, but your application would then need to have some logic to handle missing attributes. So you might throw your own error message in that case or tell them to contact an administrator or something like that. So for our case, we'll just check required for all of these. And we added SAML subject. You can really add any additional attributes that your application will require here. And then we just hit continue to next step. Everybody cut up now? Okay, so then we get a review screen before we publish it, just to make sure we can, if we needed to go back and make any changes, we could, but we'll save and publish this. And our application has been saved. So now we have a connection from PingOne to our application. So the next step is to multiplex that out to our partners. So the way we're going to be doing that for the lab is through the upcoming managed account feature. So to get there, we go to managed accounts, and we're going to choose create account. So this is going to create another account for your partner. Those familiar with PingOne for Enterprise, this looks a lot like that. So you're going to give this an account name, and I'm going to use example.com. You can use something like your first initial last name.com or your domain name. It's really just a reference number for or a reference name that you can use to identify this managed account. Okay, so once we've created that account, PingOne gives us the option to create an identity repository for this customer. So at this point, we're kind of leaving our PingOne SSO for SaaS apps account, and we're going to be within the partner's account or the customer's account. So anytime you're in a partner account, you'll notice there's a blue bar at the top that tells you that you're in a managed account, just so you know kind of where you are. So like I mentioned, we support many different types of identity repositories. You could use AD Connect, which is a agent that sits in a customer's Active Directory, and so you can use their Active Directory for SSO. Ping Federate, Google, any third-party SAML provider, or an OpenID Connect identity bridge. Or you can use the built-in PingOne directory if you're in a use case where you're going to be managing the users of your customer. So we're going to choose that, and then click Next. And it'll take a minute. PingOne's just going to set up the identity repository and the PingOne directory for this account. So we can click Finished here, because we're not quite ready to add another user just yet. So we're going to go ahead and create a group just so we can kind of see how that fits in. So we go up to the Users tab, and then in the Group sub-tab, we'll scroll down a bit, and we'll just click Add Group. And this is just going to be a group that we can use to identify the user within the application. We're not going to give it any admin privileges, so we're just going to call this Sales and save it. Then we're going to go ahead and add a user. So PingOne Directory gives two methods to add a user. You can just enter their email, and then they'll get an invite that they can follow the process to fill in their profile information. For our cases, we are just going to directly add the user. So we'll choose Add Users and then Create New User. So we specify a password for our user. And for the username for your lab, you can use whatever you want. If you want to use a real email address, that's fine. If you want to make one up, that's fine as well. We've gone through this before, and if you're making one up, it might be a good idea to write it down. Okay, and our demo user is going to be a member of our sales team, so we'll add this user to the sales group. So you can just, go to Group Memberships and click the Add button. So now that user is a member of our sales group, and we'll click Save. Okay, so our next step is to create our connection from this partner to our application. So we'll do that by clicking up to the top of the screen under Applications. And recall we added that to the private application catalog, so we'll click that in the sub-navigation bar. And we see our application here, so we'll just hit the little play button to get in and configure this. And this is where our name and description we applied earlier will show up, just so the administrator knows that this is the right application, and then click Setup. So we have a couple options that are specific to this partner. So we have Target Resource, which would be a resource that a user would be redirected to after SSO. So this gets passed along with the SAML assertion as the relay state value. We don't need to specify that in this lab. And then there's the forced authentication or forced reauthentication checkbox. This would force the user to enter their credentials again, even if they had an existing session within PingOne. So if you wanted to make sure that they were reauthenticated each time, just check that. And then click Continue to Next Step. And this is where we set up the attribute mapping. So this is one of the key benefits of the new Managed Accounts feature. Because you're going to be integrating with different partners with different SSO solutions, you don't know that the attributes they're sending are the attributes your application requires. So we'll see that in a couple of these examples. So to set up the mappings, we're using the PingOne directory as the IDP. If you had imported metadata that included available attributes, PingOne would remember those and make some suggestions here to what attributes are available. So if you just click into the identity bridge box, you'll have the available attributes. So in this case, our application is requiring an attribute called mail, where it's going to look for the user's mail address. But in our identity repository, it's email. So this is what takes care of the mapping. So family name is another good example. We're looking for family name, but the ID bridge has last name. And we're going to map our groups attribute to member of. You can just type in there, it'll auto-detect. And we'll leave our SAML subject mapped to SAML subject. But you could change that or apply some transformations if you needed to. If the identity provider was sending maybe a username as SAML subject and you wanted an email, you could just map this to email. So we get some options to customize this. So these settings, again, only apply to the partner that we're working with right now. So if they wanted to rename the application or have a different description or apply a different category, they could do so here. So we'll save and publish those changes. And we get a review screen to review the settings. Just a quick note about the initiate single sign-on URL. This would be the URL that you would use to initiate the single sign-on. So if you wanted to provide your users a bookmark or put this on your company portal site, you would use this URL. But we're going to test SSO in a different method, so you don't have to copy that. So then we can just click Finish. And now I can show you group assignment. So we'll go into Users in the top navigation bar. And we'll go to User Groups. So we'll see any groups that we've defined, they'll show up here. So we see the two default administrators and users, and of course the new sales group that we created. So we can assign the application. I'm going to assign it to just all users. You could assign it to the sales group that you created. So we just open this up and select our app and then click Save. And this list will automatically sort by the most applications assigned to it. So if you have a number of applications, you can just kind of sort out which groups have the most assigned, and they'll be in order of that. Okay, so we talked about the PingOne doc. The PingOne doc is an applications portal. It's you may wish to tell users to go to the PingOne doc if you had a number of applications you were hosting, and they would have a choice of all the applications that they have access to. So we can do some customization here. So to do that, we'll go to Setup, and then click Doc, and you'll be defaulted to the Configuration tab. So you were automatically assigned a company ID by PingOne when this account was created. So we can actually replace this with a more friendly identifier. So this does need to be unique within PingOne. So I'm going to use, you can just use your first initial last name, and it will tell you if there's a conflict. So you can just customize that, and you'll notice that that change is reflected in the PingOne doc URL. So then this would be the URL that you give your users if you had multiple applications and you wanted them to use the landing page. So session lifetime, I mentioned earlier, if a user has an existing session with PingOne, they won't get prompted to re-authenticate at their identity provider unless you choose that force re-authentication option. So you can customize the length of time that PingOne will keep an active session for a user. So the default is 2 hours, and you can choose any of these values for that session lifetime. So we'll just change that 30 or 45 minutes, whatever you decide. And the user support message on the PingOne doc, there's a need help link that they can click on. So here's where you might put in your help desk's email address or phone number. So if a user clicks the need help icon, then they'll see this message. Okay, and our attribute mappings, we can skip over this. This is predefined for our PingOne directory account. And then we just save those settings. And you'll get a green bar at the top that tells you that those settings were saved successfully. So the next step is to kind of assign some branding. We kind of want this to look like the partner might want to apply their own corporate logo to the PingOne doc that they see. So we're going to go to the account tab, and then branding, and we're going to apply our corporate logo. I'm going to use the same icon I used before. You can do the same. Save that. So now we're ready to do a test. So we can go back to the Setup tab and go back to our doc configuration. And we'll just right click on the doc URL and we'll open that up in a new private window. So here's the sign-in screen. So we can just type in our example username. This was the user that we created. So since this is the user's first login to the PingOne doc, they get a bit of a tutorial. Just kind of shows them around. They have the option to hide the application categories menu. They can search for applications. And if they needed to edit profile or view profile information, they could just click on the silhouette icon. So we'll say got it here. So you'll notice kind of up in the upper left, this was the logo that we applied on the branding screen. So this would show their corporate logo. So to access this application, since we did assign the user to the application, this is what shows up here. If we had multiple applications, they would have them all on this main screen. So we're going to sign into that application, and you should see a screen like this. Are there any questions at this point while we wait for everybody to finish up? Sure. Sorry, say again? Oh yeah, absolutely. So when we first had we entered the managed account and we got that first screen to choose AD Connect or Google or Ping Federate or third party. If your partner had a SSO solution, you could just choose that, and it would give you similar options where you import the metadata from that SSO solution and then do a metadata exchange with that. So then they're federated, and then they're responsible for managing users and things like that. Yeah, so I'm going to actually show IDP Discovery, so that would be Sp-Initiated, where they'd actually go to your application site first, and then it gets redirected back through PingOne for authentication. Or you could just use that initiate SSO URL to get them directly into the application. Sorry to keep going here, just so we might get tight on time. So this application, obviously very simple, doesn't do anything fancy. It's basically just printing out the attributes that it got through the SSO process. So we can see here a number of attributes are specified. So we have our first name, last name, subject, and email. We also showed the user's group membership, so you could actually use that information to determine what to show a user. So this user's in the sales group, and we know that, so you could make some logic decisions there. And the IDP ID and authenticating authority are the attributes I mentioned earlier when we set up the application. They were kind of special and handled by PingOne. These give your applications some information about how the user authenticated. So the authenticating authority would actually have the entity ID, excuse me, entity ID of the identity provider. So in our case, we're using the PingOne directory, so it's a pingone.com entity ID. If you were integrated with a third-party SAML identity provider, it would be the entity ID of that provider. And the IDP ID is an identifier that PingOne assigned to that application. So if in your user database within your application you wanted to maybe redirect a user based on this value to a different tenant or something like that, you could do so. So that demonstrates the SSO process. So now we'll talk about IDP Discovery, which is necessary for Sp-Initiated Sso. So we'll go ahead and close our incognito window. And we're going to exit out of the managed account. We're going to get back to our SSO for SaaS apps account. That's where we determine IDP Discovery. So your application, when you integrate it with PingOne, it only knows that you are integrated with PingOne. So it's going to, if a user tries to do Sp-Initiated Sso, your application is going to send an authent request to PingOne. PingOne's multi-tenanted, so it needs to know where that request needs to go to authenticate the user properly. So we have a feature called IDP Discovery. And what this allows us to do is to specify a list of email domains for this particular partner. So they'll be prompted for their email address, and we'll use that information to route them properly to the IDP. So we're going to make sure we specify the same domain name as we used for our example user earlier. So that means any user that gets the prompt for verify your information, if they enter anything at example.com, they're going to get sent to this partner's account that we just set up. The default IDP would be if you had, maybe you wanted to have a directory that you manage for like a bucket of users that are individual users, or maybe don't have their SSO solution. So you could do something like set up email domains for all the customers that brought their own SSO solution, and then have one dedicated as a default. So if there was no match, they would get sent to that IDP for authentication. But since we know our partner's domain, we're going to use that. Just comma separated, right, Mark? Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you can do something like this. So then we'll save that off. So then to test Sp-Initiated Sso, we've provided that in the lab document. And this is another case where you'll need to replace the X with your student number. So in a real-world example, you might have something set up where they go to your application site and then they click an option to use SSO instead of putting in their username and password, which would redirect them to this link. So we'll do this in a new private window. And then replace the X with your student number. And then you should get the verify your account screen. Okay, so once the user's at this screen, they would enter the email address, and really PingOne's just doing a check against the domain they specify. So since this is the domain we defined in Idp Discovery, it's going to know where to route our user. And since they started this process by going to our application, they didn't get redirected to the PingOne doc. They just got straight into the application. And all the same user attributes are available to the application. It's just a different way to initiate the SSO process. So that should have worked for everybody. So that was the last step, last test we needed to verify. So we've onboarded our first partner essentially, and it kind of took us about 50 minutes. So pretty efficient. And so this was again a case where we're managing the users for our partner. So again, you might have different partners that want to onboard their Ping Federate instance or a third-party SAML, and that works very similar. It's just you do attribute mappings a little bit differently depending on the system they're using. Any questions we can answer? All right, well, thanks for coming out. I know this was the last session on the last day, so really appreciate your time to come out and actually do a hands-on lab for those who participated, so really appreciate that. Is there anybody that just didn't have a laptop that would like to go through this exercise on their own? Okay. It was going to depend on how many people wanted to do it later. Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, I guess for the end of this week. And you could, of course, if somebody did participate today and you wanted to go and kind of go through it again, it's just a matter of going in. When you go into managed accounts, you have the option to turn off an account, and then you can go into applications and delete it and redo it. Oh, that works too. Thanks, Mark. All right, so I hope everybody enjoys the final keynotes tonight and the party. We'll hope to see you there. Thank you.